I don't want to be dramatic and say, like, read these books before they're banned, but, like, read these books before they're banned. Whether it's because of the increasingly terrifying times that we live in, when women's reproductive rights are actually rolling backwards rather than advancing, AI is introducing fun new ways of exploiting and abusing women, or because raging misogynists like Andrew Tate want to run to be Prime Minister, and it's making more of us think more deeply about trying to understand this thing called feminism. I don't know why exactly, but the first video that I ever made on YouTube about feminist books to read has started to get a few more views lately. So I thought I'm gonna redo it and do a follow-up, a part 2. There will be a small number of spoilers just because I want you to have a good understanding of what these books are about so that you can actually decide whether you want to read them, but it's nothing major that wouldn't be revealed in the first few chapters of any of these books. But fair warning, you have been warned. This is a particularly poignant time to be remaking this video because I've been seeing a lot of content from Lena Norms, from Ashley Embers, and from Plant-Faced Bride about how increasingly everything that we own or consume is moving towards a subscription model or a licensing model, so that instead of us owning things outright, we are now sort of just renting them for a time. They don't actually belong to us, and this has quite a lot of major potential social and political implications. What I mean by that is, whilst a decade ago you might have bought a film on DVD and owned it and could play it whenever you wanted to, now we just pay for Netflix to get access to streaming loads of different films whenever we want, which is great, but there's also downsides. Netflix has control over what they want to have on that platform, just like Amazon has control over what they want to have in the Kindle ebook store, for example. They could remove whatever content they wanted to, they could edit the content available, and you don't get a say in that at all. And this is quite dangerous because it means that these massive companies owned by people like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, you know the type, they actually have the power to restrict access to knowledge and erase certain types of knowledge basically from existence. Obviously not the physical copies, but that's exactly what I'm talking about here. The digital landscape is what most of us are now interacting with day to day. That's where we get most of our information. And it's so easy to tweak and to change and to just completely erase things. And we know that one of the key tenets of authoritarianism and dictatorships is restricting that access to knowledge. For example, I wouldn't be that surprised if we saw the Kindle store moving towards featuring more prominently the types of books and the types of content that are more aligned with a Trump presidency.
We've also seen former President-elect Trump, spending a lot of time on the campaign trail with the Moms for Liberty group, sort of a far-right, more conservative group that has been a big part of pushing some of those book ban proposals, trying to get books, specifically books that mention race or gender identity, out of school libraries.
Pushing further down the list, books about things like gender or feminism or trans rights or Palestine or environmentalism, because we know that certain bits of content, certain entire functions of the government have been just erased essentially overnight in the last couple of weeks. And the scary thing is that you wouldn't actually realize that they're doing it, because just like your Instagram algorithm will simply tailor content to you, you don't notice that it's happening because that's all that you experience. There has actually been a case in Norway of a woman whose Kindle got completely scrubbed by Amazon, and it took quite a big campaign to get all of her books back. Kindle could, in theory, remove all banned books from every single Kindle in the whole world just through your Wi-Fi network. I know that that sounds a little bit like Fahrenheit 451 or 1984 if you've read those books, but we are increasingly moving towards that. It could easily happen, especially when it's such a small handful of white men who own these platforms that we consume everything through, right? And when you have a government that has such a strong stance on immigration, on trans rights, on feminism, on environmentalism, we should really fight for the right to keep ownership of ideas by those groups of people so that they don't disappear. And that's why I think owning physical books is so powerful, almost like an act of resistance in this sort of political climate. In 2023, Roald Dahl's ebooks got automatically updated with new censored versions containing hundreds of changes to language related to weight, mental health, violence, gender, and race. I don't want to be dramatic and say, like, read these books before they're banned, but, like, read these books before they're banned. And get a physical copy if you can from an independent bookshop or secondhand, and then share it with your friends. Now let's grab a hot drink and let's get these books added to your TBR. Okay, let's start with some fiction favorites. Some of these books speak to the experiences of women in different times in history and different parts of the world, and some are even set in imagined dystopian futures, which is the case for our first book, which is Vox by Christina Dalcher. I was really pleased when I found this in a charity shop for £1.50. Charity shops are your best friends when it comes to books, because I've been meaning to read it for a really long time. It's sort of similar to The Handmaid's Tale, if you've read that, but it is set very close to our present timeline, which I think makes it even more believable and in a way scarier. In the world that Vox imagines for America, women are only allowed to speak 100 words a day, and all of their rights, all of their movements are controlled by their husbands and by a very dogmatic religious US government. They have these counters on their wrists, like Fitbits that run on fragile male egos and patriarchy. These counters count how many words they speak, and if they go over 100 words, then they actually administer an electric shock. But it turns out that our protagonist, Jean, used to be a very prominent linguist. And so when the president's brother apparently suffers a stroke and develops vernix aphasia, which is a real thing, that is a language impairment, she is called in to find a cure for it, which is what she was working on before all of these restrictions came in. I actually studied linguistics at university, so this was so up my street. I really recommend it for anyone that is interested in language. This book is packed full of suspense and mystery. It's almost kind of like a crime drama in a way. One of the key themes that I found really interesting is that in the book, Jean has a friend called Jackie who she lived with at university, and Jackie was always really vocal and really active in demonstrations and protests for women's rights. Jean has these flashbacks where she remembers that at the time she couldn't really bring herself to care about it. She didn't see what the consequences would be, and so she didn't take those actions to prevent the things that were to come and to prevent them for her daughter as well that she would have in the future. In one section, Christina Dalcher writes, "It's not your fault," Lorenzo says, "but it is. And my fault didn't start when I signed Morgan's contract on Thursday." That's the guy who runs the lab where she ends up working. "My fault started 2 decades ago. The first time I didn't vote, the umpteen times I told Jackie I was too busy to go on one of her marches, or make posters, or call my congressman." It also deals in quite a nuanced way with the role that men have to play in defending women's rights, which I found really interesting as well. So, love it. Add this to your list and read it. For context, all of what I just said there was like 400 to 500 words, so I would not survive in the world of Vox. I'm a yapper, down to my DNA. The next one is something quite different again. This is a Waterstones Book of the Year and a Sunday Times bestseller, and it is Butter by Asako Yuzuki. This is a Japanese novel that combines themes of food and femininity and social expectations of women, specifically in Japan. For that reason, I found this really interesting as someone who's never experienced beauty ideals in that particular part of the world. It's inspired by the real-life story of the Kankatsu killer, which is the story of this woman who seduces men through her cooking and then is on trial for murder. So in this book, we follow the protagonist, who is a journalist called Rika, and she becomes kind of obsessed with this story. She becomes obsessed with this mysterious figure that is Manako Kaji, who is the killer in the book, or she's the person accused of being a killer. And in order to understand her better, she starts to eat the way that Kaji has been eating and the kind of food that she was feeding to these men, and she starts to put on a little bit of weight, and basically she just puts loads of like really bougie butter on everything, which sounds pretty good. And as a result of her putting on weight, the book then starts to explore her relationship with these societal expectations on women in Japan to be really slim and tiny. But another theme in the book is how women are really expected to be self-sacrificial for their husbands and for their dads as well, to look after them, and it's kind of their responsibility that men in their lives are healthy. Here's one of the sections that I highlighted. And yet Rika had realized a while back that even if she were to lose a few kilos, she still wouldn't pass. However beautiful she became, however well she did at work, even if she got married and had children, society didn't let women off that easily. The standards were getting higher and assessments harsher. The only way to be free of it, however scary and anxiety-inducing it was, however much you kept on looking back to check whether or not people were laughing at you, was to learn to accept yourself. If you want to dive into a different culture and explore femininity from a different cultural perspective, then definitely grab this. It will make you hungry, fair warning. The next books I actually read on my Kindle. Yeah, I know, I am a hypocrite, as is basically everyone else. But these are Greek myth retellings. This is a genre that has really blown up recently, I think, and I went down a real rabbit hole with these. I've read like over a dozen of them, and I got so into them that I actually got these stickers for my Kindle. Aren't they so cute? They're also a bit of like a status signifier, because I feel pretty proud like being able to name all of these Greek myth ladies. But anyway, I could talk about so many of these books, but my standout favorites that I wanted to touch on in this video were Circe and Ariadne. So starting with Circe, which is written by Madeline Miller, who also wrote Song of Achilles, which is a massive book talk book at the moment. Circe is a witch. She's an enchantress. In Greek mythology, she is featured in Homer's The Odyssey, but before retellings like this, she was always just a side character to Odysseus's quest to sail home after the Trojan War. And what these retellings do is flip the script and tell these stories from the perspectives of the women who were sidelined in these myths. And when they do that, you realize how these women were abused, betrayed, and cast aside. And through that, these retellings highlight the power imbalance in patriarchal societies. And they are sharing stories that are quite empowering of women that are taking back that power. Circe gets cast out of her divine family, and she gets basically abandoned on this island that she then makes her own. She uses it to work on her witchcraft, and she starts learning all about herbs and how to kind of control her magic. And the thing that I really liked about this book as well is that it really introduces you to quite a cast of characters from Greek mythology. So if you wanted to dive into some other books afterwards to kind of follow up on their stories, you've already got a bit of an introduction to them through Circe. Ultimately, this book is about self-liberation and strength. Like, Circe does not hesitate to turn men into pigs when they come to her house and they're expecting her to be all vulnerable because she's alone, and they look to take advantage of her. She is badass. Here's one quote that I loved from when a group of men land on her island. "Mistress," the leader would say, "do not tell me that such beauty as yourself dwells all alone." "Oh yes," I would answer, "quite alone." He would smile. He could not help it. There was never any fear in him. Why should there be? He had already noted for himself that there was no man's cloak hanging by the door, no hunter's bow, no shepherd's staff, no sign of brothers or fathers or sons, no vengeance that would follow after. If I were valuable to anyone, I would not be allowed to live alone. "I'm sorry to hear it," he said. The bench would scrape and he would stand. The men watched with bright eyes. They wanted the freeze, the flinch, the begging that would come. It was my favourite moment, seeing them frown and try to understand why I wasn't afraid. In their bodies I could feel my herbs, like strings waiting to be plucked. I savoured their confusion, their dawning fear. Then I plucked them. Their backs bent, forcing them onto hands and knees, faces bloating like drowned corpses. They thrashed and benches turned over, wine splattering the floor. Their screams broke into squeals. I am certain it hurt. She's like, yeah, witchy vibes, so good, loved it. Let's talk a little bit about Ariadne as well. This is a novel by Jennifer Saint. She's also written some other great ones like Hera and Atlanta that I also really enjoyed. Ariadne was a princess of Crete, and she, like Circe, features in the male-oriented tale of Theseus and the Minotaur, in which a great warrior, Theseus, defeats the terrible monster that lives in the labyrinth underneath Crete with the help of King Minos' daughter Ariadne. This novel really reclaims her story because, as it turns out, Theseus is actually a lying bastard. It really critiques how these myths punish women for their choices, like Ariadne falling in love with Theseus and then helping him to kill the Minotaur and then escape, whilst it also glorifies men's betrayals and the treatment of women. Theseus is treated as this hero in other Greek myths, even though he is actually a very cruel man, according to this retelling of the story. As Ariadne tells us, What I did not know was that I had hit up on a truth of womanhood. However blameless a life we led, the passions and the greed of men could bring us to ruin, and there was nothing we could do. This book has some romance, some very beautifully crafted passages that really reflect on women's experiences, as does Circe. I think Ariadne was one of the first books that was part of this binge that I went on of Greek myth retellings, and I loved it so much that my boyfriend actually bought me a print of Ariadne's Island. So if that's not a glowing review and something to convince you to read it, then I don't know what is. I thought part 2 of this video deserved a bit of a scene change, the non-fiction books. By the way, if you are enjoying this video, then do hit that subscribe button to stick around afterwards and chat more about feminism and let YouTube know that we want to be friends. Let's kick off this non-fiction chapter with this book, In Defense of Witches by Mona Chollet, Why Women Are Still on Trial, and translated by Sophie R. Lewis. I picked up this book initially for a separate video that I've been wanting to do all about how women are still on trial in society today for not conforming to society's expectations of what we're supposed to be like, even though the actual witch hunts of Europe and America ended centuries ago. I have actually scripted that video, but it just gets bigger and bigger because there's so much to talk about. But let me know if that's one that you want me to put out soon in the comments down below. This is another one of those books where every other page I was highlighting stuff, underlining, making notes because it was just so illuminating. Mona Chollet is a journalist, and in this book she recasts the witch as a powerful role model, an emblem of strength, free to exist beyond the narrow limits society imposes on women. So really this is a natural follow-on from a book like Circe. She talks about 3 different archetypes of women who were prosecuted during the witch trials. So childless women, independent women, and women who were embracing aging. All of these are juicy topics that I could spend hours talking about, but in a nutshell, she covers everything from how women exist in the healthcare system all the way to pop culture references of witches as well. In one particular passage that has really stuck with me that I highlighted, one of many, so she says, "The state no longer organizes public executions for alleged witches, but the death penalty for women who wish to be free has in a sense been privatized. When a woman is killed by her partner or ex-partner, which in France occurs every 3 days on average, it is often because she has left the partner or announced her intention to do so." Scary, but true. I love this topic because I didn't actually realize until I started researching into it that a lot of the historiography, the history that we're taught in schools around the 17th, 18th century and the witch trials completely misses out the gendered nature of these crimes. There were incredibly sexist motivations underlying the persecution of women as witches, which is just not something that we hear often about. So in the same way that Circe or Ariadne are shining a new light on what was usually these male-centric Greek myths, books like these shine a light on what was actually a very gendered time and subject in history that needs to be viewed much more from a feminist lens. So pick this one up. Now for a couple of books that I actually listened to as audiobooks. Firstly, Wordslut by Amanda and Montell. I read Amanda's book Cultish before I read this one and absolutely loved it. She has a podcast of the same name as well, where they talk about all sorts of different things that are cultish. So like Swifties to spin classes to CrossFit to like all sorts of things that could potentially be considered a cult. So that's super interesting. Check that out as well. But in this book, she shares a really insightful and accessible exploration of how language shapes power, identity, and gender. It talks about a lot of different myths, like how women talk more than men, or that women need to stop apologizing for things, or that they need to change the way that they speak in professional settings to get further ahead in their careers and things like that. This is a really fantastic introduction to how the English language is often used to belittle and police women in ways that we in a normal conversation might not even realize is happening. So it's also a really great introduction to the world of what's called sociolinguistics. It will make you rethink the words that you probably use pretty automatically on a day-to-day basis. Again, I was drawn to this one because of my background in linguistics, but it really is super accessible. It's very introductory. So if you've ever been interested in language and English language and how gender is created through language, then definitely check this one out. It's got a lot of these light bulb moments when you realize, oh, I use that word every single day and I didn't even think about it that way. I didn't even think about the origins of it or what it actually means to call women XYZ. I particularly enjoyed listening to the chapter that was all about swearing, except because it was an audiobook. I was listening to it out loud while I was cooking dinner. So I hope my neighbors appreciated that too. This is also a really great one that will give you some fun facts to pull out at the dinner table next time you're surrounded by some of those slightly sexist family members. So all good fun. Another book that I really recommend that I very recently listened to as an audiobook as well is Work Like a Woman by Mary Portas. And it was narrated by her as well, which I think always lends like an extra nice little layer, like you're listening to a podcast or having a personal conversation with the author.
Because when men and women become equal partners in life as well as work, we will create a different kind of world. One in which the masculine and the feminine emerge to become even stronger together than they are apart.
I'd read Rebuild by Mary Portas before as well, which is really thin and it's much more about how we can build sustainable and ethical businesses in a post-COVID world. In Work Like a Woman, Mary Portas takes you through her incredible career, starting from when she was dressing windows for like Topshop, all the way through to working at a really high level for a lot of massive brands, through to her starting her own consultancy, and the ways in which she realized through that journey that a lot of how the world of work is set up is just not great for women. It's just not set up in a way that allows women or men to lean into more feminine traits like empathy or collaboration to succeed in business. She talks a lot about the alpha male culture of work environments, and she lays out a vision for how we can improve it and move away from it in a way that is better for everyone, but crucially in a way that doesn't prioritize infinite growth and profits over people and the planet. She really does not hold back. She's an excellent narrator and she makes it really quite an enjoyable and funny experience listening to this book. If you're trying to navigate your way through your career and you're getting frustrated that the whole system seems to be built for single childless white guys, because it is, then this is a really fantastic book that makes you feel seen and heard and sort of comforted. I felt like she was kind of taking my hand and coaching me through the next steps of my career. And I really related to a lot of the stuff that she was talking about with the early years of her career. And it made me feel like I'm not alone and that we can change some of these things together. I wrote down this one quote that really resonated with me at the time. In my experience, this is the multi-layered reality of being a woman at the top of business, containing many different selves but showing only one externally. And this question of identity is, I believe, crucial to what slows women down on the way to the top. It's why in so many cases we aspire to leadership but don't actually want to become leaders because of who we have to become. Staying on the topic of trying to find work that doesn't fill you with daily feminist rage, I've just finished, well, more like absolutely devoured this book, which is The Success Myth, Letting Go of Having It All by Emma Gannon. Can you tell I'm going through a bit of like an existential career crisis moment right now? Because I saw this on the bookshelf in Waterstones and it just spoke to me. Maybe it's the pink and green. I am an absolute sucker for pink and green, but this book was also excellent. I thought you weren't supposed to judge a book by its cover, but here we are. This book takes you through various different myths that we've been told about what it means to be successful in work and in life. Like the you are your job myth or the arrival myth, which is this idea that once I arrive at a particular point in my life, then I feel like I will be successful and then I feel like I will have achieved the thing. But that point never actually comes with the feelings that you think it will. At the end of every chapter, she also gives you these questions to think through and to work through, so it actually becomes even more of like a workbook. My main takeaway from this, and something that I've been thinking about a lot since I finished it, was the fact that a lot of the time, when people say that they want to be successful, what they actually mean is that they want time. Like time to do whatever it is that they want. Because a lot of really successful people that she sort of interviewed for this book and interviewed on her podcast as well, seem to, once they've reached a certain level of success that they're happy with, they just seem to take a step back and find fulfillment and contentment in enjoying the slower, more simple things in life. But to do that, you need to have time to do those things, if you see what I mean. So to be able to live a life where you can have a lion every day, or wake up and have a nice cup of tea and just read your book and then go out for a nice walk and like walk the dog and catch up with friends, like to be able to live like a leisurely, slow-paced lifestyle requires that you have a lot of money and that you don't have to work a traditional like 9-to-5 job. I highlighted so many things in this book again, including things like this. Most of the time, the things I think should give me joy actually don't, whereas the things I overlook as boring or familiar or small give me huge dollops of joy. For example, getting attention on social media often makes me feel flat. I always assume I'd feel happy with more likes. Yet conversation when a good friend calls me out of the blue when I'm convinced I'm too busy instantly cheers me up. Science backs this up, with different brain chemicals involved in our emotions when connecting loosely online compared with when we have direct human interaction. Creativity makes me feel free because when I am writing or making, I'm not overthinking, and I'm using the right side of my brain, which is associated with being more visual and intuitive. I feel like this book really gives you, or at least it gave me, this sense of permission to sort of write my own story and to kind of colour outside the lines, as cliche as that sounds, when it comes to like determining my own career and the trajectory of my life, because there's so many interviews in here with people who have reached like the pinnacle of success in various different ways. And so it feels really comforting, similar to Work Like a Woman by Mary Portas. It seems very comforting because you're listening to the expertise and wisdom of so many other people. So you're not just kind of listening to your own intuition, which of course you should also do that, but you can kind of support that intuition when you start thinking a bit more rationally about things with like the experience of real people that have been through the things that you might feel like you should be striving for. And all of these people say that their initial definition of what they thought success would look like was actually bogus compared to what it actually is. Often it just turns out to be mindful, intentional living that makes them feel successful in their day-to-day lives, rather than living for these really big moments when they feel like they will have arrived at their destination. The books that I mentioned in my previous video are still firm favorites, so if you're looking for more recommendations, then head over to that video next. Drop any of your own recommendations in the comments below as well, and if you've read any of these books, then let me know what you thought of them as well. If you do want to purchase some of these books, then I really recommend going either secondhand or supporting independent bookshops through something like World of Books or bookshop.org. If you go to the link in the description, you'll also get to see my full list of my favorite feminist books as my bookshop.org affiliate collection, so check that out. Stay kind, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!